I can tell it from my own perspective. Uh, so when Turtle Story was done, it was as I said, it was linear and disconnected in the sense that I was like, okay, there's a science story there, and someone said, children should know about this, and so, write the story to tell the science very explicitly. And I had little or no engagement in the production of the illustrations. The artist read the story and produced stuff that looked beautiful, and I was like, it looks beautiful, and that was the end of it. By the time, we by the in the construction of current conservation, there's a much deeper engagement with the production of that piece itself, in the sense that the editors will talk to the artists, and the artists will produce a bunch of different concept sketches, and then we sort of choose from that and try and figure out which one works best and in which form it would best communicate the story. We're going one step further now. One of the things that we want to start doing this year is get the artist and the scientist in the room together before the article is written, so that the production of the piece as a whole starts at both ends simultaneously, and they work their way towards producing the final product, right? So that's a progression, and I guess it's a progression that we're trying to encourage. We would like to encourage both communities to make. You're absolutely right that there are many other scientists such as myself who've said, "Oh, I'd like to write a story for children," but most people are stuck in that first stage of development, which is like you write something to communicate a point, give it to somebody, they illustrate it, and that it ends there. The engagement doesn't go further. And I guess I discovered that much more comes out of when you actually collaborate in the true sense of the word collaborate, and I think that's where we're trying to bring more people on board. Yeah, in fact, I would apart from Meera saying, why don't you write a murder mystery for children? The other thing that inspired Laurie was the artist Prabha Malia showing me some of the illustrations that she had done for the Wildings, which is another. It's the two books about cats. 100 Names of Darkness and the Wildings. It's beautiful illustrations, and she showed me the illustrations that she'd done for that. And in some sense, the story was constructed around the idea of illustrations that would look like that. So I would say that that even that was not a true collaboration in that sense of the word, but to a certain extent, the style of the writing, the length of the story, the trajectory of the novel came out of what the images would look like, because I had a mental idea of where that was going. So yeah. Sure.
I mean, we've had researchers talk to us before as well. And they've, all their lives are spent doing the research, but then maybe not going or actively wanting to create awareness around it. That's a different ballgame altogether, right? I mean, so have you worked with other researchers as well, research material and create that as well in your magazine?
So current conservation is for a global community of researchers and students. So we invite and have articles coming in from students and researchers from around the world. I guess our online content is read internationally, but our hard copy mostly goes out only within India. Nevertheless, regardless of what the readership is, our goal is to have the content as sort of broad and wide, globally sort of wide as possible. I think the magazine works at two levels. One, it's both for the people that read it as well as for the people that write for it. So we have a two sort of bi-directional goal. I mean, we're trying to bring these scientists and researchers and so on. We want to make them think more about communicating to wider audiences. So one of the things we do is called research in translation, which is basically simple summaries of scientific papers. And what we've been doing for the last more actively for the last few months is getting people in universities across the world to get their students and young students, undergraduate students, graduate students, to write these summaries. So we're trying to get students at the earliest stages to not just think about writing, dense scientific articles which nobody will read, but also simpler things that can reach out. And if we're successful in that, that's really that's one of the things I'm excited about, because then I think we're making an impact on making young, scientists in training think at a very early stage about how do I talk to the world. Urban ecology has become quite a popular sort of field of research, as well as a sort of as an area of conservation. As environmental protection became popular in the 20th century, people thought about environment, nature, wildlife as being things out there, outside, where there are no people. The idea of wilderness comes from, in fact, an American notion of the wild. So pristine wildernesses are even today what many conservationists believe is required. However, in the last 2 or 3 decades, there's also been a move towards integrating more closely people and conservation, both people sort of living in rural or forest areas, but also the fact that the majority of the world's population lives in cities today, right? So if you want to build up a conservation ethic, you have to start with this really large body of people who are in some ways the most disconnected from nature. We've all heard stories of children growing up thinking that milk comes from cartons and so on. I mean, it's a fact. I mean, that the people with the most power and the most money are the most disconnected from nature. And so there's the idea of urban ecology, I think, has 2 goals. One is that these vast urban spaces that are also increasing across the world need to reconcile those spaces with both human use as well as with biodiversity conservation, right? And secondly, that also then makes nature accessible to this community, which hopefully builds greater sensitivity. So there are people in Bangalore that have been working on Bangalore's urban ecology at A3, which is the Ashoka Trust for Research in Ecology and Environment, at the Azim Premji University, and various other. There's lots of citizens groups for lakes in Bangalore now. So there's actually a lot of a lot more attention to urban ecology than there was even 10 years ago. Well, I should confess that I've written non-fiction from even earlier, fiction even from even earlier on. So I've been writing plays and short stories and so on. But most of my writing up to that point, the fiction had very little to do with nature, wildlife, environment. It was sort of random and separate. And so when I wrote my first children's story, I think I was under the misguided impression that the story had to be led by the science, and then I rediscovered my love for writing, and then I said, forget the science. The science will find its way in. That's secondary. But the reflection is that if people begin enjoying the art of telling the story, then they're going to write more interesting stories. Honestly, I've read a lot of children's books about wildlife and nature, and some are spectacular. A lot of them are awful, and they're not awful because they have bad illustrations or the grammar is bad or anything like that. But they just completely lack imagination. And I've got to confess that my first one, the turtle story, really does lack imagination. It completely lacks. It's a hatchling that goes out and does exactly what real time. Apart from the fact that the hatchling has a voice, there's not an iota of imagination in it. And so when I discovered that I was enjoying it more because I was, letting the science come secondarily, I felt that this is something that we have to draw people into. And scientists aren't going to sort of, I guess, if it took me 3 books and 10 years to realize it, then it's going to be even harder for people that haven't, thought about doing it at all. And so, again, CC is one step where we want to draw people into it. and some people will need to be, quote unquote, trained. Today there are short courses on science writing for the public. The National Center for Biological Sciences runs a 2-week course every July on popular science writing, and a very accomplished science writer called Anil Ananthaswamy runs that workshop. And many people that have come out of that have finished their PhDs and gone on to careers in science journalism instead of science. So that one step towards writing something more creative, there are. I don't actually know of ones that actually go multiple steps in that direction yet, but yeah. We're very broad within the sort of so conservation is fortunately for us a multidisciplinary field. So it includes ecology, environment. There's a lot of quantitative elements in ecology. So mathematical models, statistical models. So we've had articles cover all of those natural sciences. It could cover environmental chemistry. We've had articles on biomechanics, which is physics, and then we've had articles on social sciences. So anthropology, sociology, environmental history, all of those disciplines. So we're able to cover a fair swath of the natural and social sciences just through the conservation lens. I'll confess that as of now we are ecology and environmental social sciences do dominate our content. But we do have the opportunity to, pretty much cover, all of the sciences through that conservation lens. Yes.
So what you're doing is really great, engaging with kids' minds. But like you said, a lot of kids now think that they become sort of cartoons and just get prized for like so this is really great. But the people who have the money, like the parents and let's say our very politicians who actually make the decisions. Do you have any thoughts on how to engage people? Like you must have heard this proposed waving front to cool, which is going to just decimate the natural area. So do you have any thoughts on how we can engage with those people?
We don't directly engage with the parents through while we don't directly engage with the parents. I think parents, especially if you're writing for age groups that need to be read out to, certainly that's, you are hoping that there's some, that you're making a connection with them. Also, this is a long-term game. I think that most of us believe, rightly or wrongly, that catch them young, right? So these kids are going to be, grown-up decision makers at some point of time. And I think we're doing a lousy job, whether it's children's books or whether it's environmental education programs, whether the work that NGOs do. We're actually doing a poor job of reaching out to people at a large scale. Even now, the reason that I really liked Pratham books as a concept is because they do simultaneous translation in about 10 to 12 Indian languages. Because otherwise, most of our stuff is only reaching the English-speaking audience. So we have a very narrow, set that we're reaching. So I would start by saying, even with children, and this is one of the things that one of the programs that Dakshin has is really sort of scaling up environmental education in the country and reaching out to people in, through the government school system, eventually across the country. But we've started in the key states where we work. We we've started a program in the Andaman Islands, and we're exploring other areas. So I would say that's something we're not doing as well as we should. Politicians, I have no idea, man. I think one has to take hope in the fact that things have changed in 20 years. While one may bemoan the fact that that Terrell's president, sorry Terrell, doesn't believe in climate change, the fact is that unlike 20 years ago, a bunch of states said and a bunch of cities said, we don't care what the president says, we're going to do what the right thing for the environment anyway, right? So in some, at various levels of society and government, there has actually been an internalization of the importance of environmental issues. And if you ask me, is there a path forward for India? And I think that we, on one hand, one has to one has to address the top, but one has to strengthen many of the other layers of government as well, from village level governance upwards, and that is what I think builds resilience in societies. But I think that I might add that my children's books are probably at the right reading level for most politicians. So don't be offended at my response. I don't know where you work, but environmental non-governmental organizations, if you ask them privately, hate being asked about impact. There's one word that NGOs loathe, it's the word impact. And this is because one's forced to measure them in completely inane ways at considerable cost by all kinds of donors. So it's every time somebody gives you a pot of money for something, they want you to tell you what the impact is. And the problem with impact is that it's impossible to separate out the effects of what you're doing from all the other effects in society. Everybody measures impact because you have to, otherwise you're not going to get your next grant. But one does it in ways that are absolutely, to my mind, meaningless and do come at a cost. I'd like to replace the idea of impact with the idea of values. Do we as a society value something? Do we value knowledge? Yes. Do we value that knowledge being widespread? Yes. Does society value art? Yes. Does society value arcane jargon? No. So I would, the principle of the premise of current conservation is simply that more people are likely to pick it up, and if not anything else, tell us that you produce a really pretty magazine, than will ever look at a scientific paper. Does that have an impact? I hope so, and I believe it does, and I believe intuitively we would all agree that it should. But I'm going to get away. I'm going to try and get away from the idea of talking about impact as a tangible.